It was Halloween night, and the exclusive party hosted by the legendary music mogul known only as Diddy was set to be one of the wildest nights in the Hollywood Hills. Rumors whispered that this wasn't just any gathering. It was said to be the last party in a mansion haunted by Hollywood's hidden, eerie past. As the sun dipped below the hills, limousines and luxury cars began dropping off A-list celebrities, influencers, and VIPs dressed in extravagant costumes. The mansion itself was a sight to behold, an eerie Gothic structure with gargoyles perched on the rooftop, shrouded in mist. Diddy had gone all out this year. The mansion was decorated with antique chandeliers, red velvet drapes, and candles flickering ominously in every corner, casting shadows that danced along the walls. In the center of the grand foyer, there was a massive mirror rumored to be cursed. It had a crack that ran from top to bottom, like a jagged scar. Every year the same warning was given: don't look too long into the mirror. People laughed it off as part of the party's theatrics, but a few whispered of an older, dark story tied to the mansion. A curse on anyone who saw their reflection in that glass. As the night wore on, guests drifted in and out of rooms, each more lavishly eerie than the last. There was a lost souls room, filled with smoky mirrors that distorted reflections, a masquerade room, where faceless mannequins seemed to watch your every move, and the whisper room, where a gramophone played crackling, distorted music that almost seemed to talk. Around midnight, a group of friends, 3 social media stars and an actor hoping for his big break, wandered upstairs, having had just enough drinks to brush off any lingering fears. They stumbled upon a dimly lit corridor with old photographs lining the walls. The photos were all black and white, capturing moments from previous Diddy parties. But there was something odd. As they squinted at each image, they noticed that all the people in the photographs seemed to be looking directly at them, eyes piercing and cold. Feeling unsettled, they were about to turn back when one of them, a well-known influencer named Kate, dared them to enter the room at the end of the hallway. "What's a Halloween party without a little scare, right?" she laughed, pushing open the door. Inside was a small, sparsely furnished room, but there it was, the mirror from downstairs, only larger and even more cracked. As each of them looked into the mirror, a chill filled the room, and the air grew dense, as though invisible hands were pressing down on their shoulders. Their reflections seemed wrong. At first it was subtle, a dark shadow behind one, a slight movement in the reflection that didn't match their own. But then it got worse. The actor, Jake, saw his reflection turn pale, and a deep, bruised mark appeared around his neck as if someone, or something, were choking him. He staggered back, eyes wide, gasping for air. Kate screamed as she watched her own reflection twist into a grotesque smile, her eyes empty and hollow, with blood slowly trickling from her mouth. The others tried to pull away from the mirror, but it was as though they were frozen, trapped by their own reflections. One by one, each of their reflections began to change, hair falling out in clumps, eyes darkening to an inky black, skin turning ashen. Their reflections leaned closer, whispering words they couldn't quite hear, but it sounded like a chant, rhythmic and sinister. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the room grew colder. The only sound was their frantic breathing, and then silence. When they looked back at the mirror, their reflections were gone. They were staring into an empty, dark void. In the silence they heard a voice, a soft, raspy whisper coming from the mirror. "Welcome. You're ours now." Panic surged through them as they tried to open the door. But it wouldn't budge. The mirror's crack seemed to widen, and from within, shadowy figures began to emerge, ghostly, distorted versions of past guests who had looked into the mirror too long. One by one, the figures reached out, their hands cold and bony, pulling each of them toward the mirror. The last thing they saw before they were swallowed into the darkness was their own horrified expressions, faces twisted in screams that no one would ever hear. Downstairs, the party continued. No one noticed that the four friends had gone missing. In the days that followed, their faces appeared in the photographs in the hallway, new additions to the haunted legacy of Diddy's mansion. And as the sun set, the mirror in the foyer stood waiting, cracked and patient, for the next Halloween night when new souls would inevitably arrive, drawn to the glamour and mystery of the last party. It was a night that only the most daring celebrities and thrill-seekers had been anticipating. Every year, Diddy threw a Halloween party that was the talk of Hollywood, but this time, he promised it would be extra unforgettable. Rumor had it that Diddy's mansion was haunted, specifically the basement, where no one was allowed to enter. Many thought it was just for show, a tactic to add mystery and drama to the night. But Diddy was firm. Anyone caught even attempting to enter the basement would be thrown out of the party. As midnight approached, the energy in the mansion felt heavier. The candles seemed to burn a little dimmer, the shadows a little darker, and there was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the October breeze. Guests who mingled near the basement stairway swore they heard faint noises coming from below. A soft humming, footsteps, or sometimes what sounded like whispers. Three friends, Sasha, Malik, and Elena, had been joking about the haunted basement all night. Sasha, a skeptic and the boldest of the group, rolled her eyes at the rumors. Haunted basement? Come on, it's probably just a creepy old storage room. Diddy probably has it rigged up with speakers to freak people out. Fueled by a few cocktails and some shared bravado, the trio decided to break the rule and check out the basement. They slipped away from the crowd and found the basement door, slightly ajar. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, they crept down the dark stairway, illuminated only by the faint light of their phones. As they descended, the air grew colder, and an unsettling stillness settled around them. The basement was not at all what they expected. Instead of dusty old boxes, it was an empty, dimly lit room, with walls covered in old, fading photographs. The pictures were bizarre, showing partygoers from past decades, some in costumes, others with blank, expressionless faces. What is this?" Malik whispered, squinting at the photos. The people in the photos were eerily familiar, and as they looked closer, they realized some of them were celebrities, famous faces from the past, most of whom had died under strange or tragic circumstances. Sasha scoffed nervously. "Just part of the act, right? This is all part of Diddy's creepy party decorations." But then they noticed something horrifying. In the corner of one photo, they saw a blurred figure, partially obscured. It looked like a shadow, but it had a pair of eyes that seemed to be watching them through the photograph. As they scanned other photos, the same figure appeared over and over again, sometimes lurking in the background, other times standing unnervingly close to the party guests. Elena shivered and turned to leave, but Sasha pulled her back. "Look!" She pointed to a picture that seemed familiar. It was a group photo from last year's Halloween party, and they recognized several friends who had been at the event. In the back of the photo, just barely visible, was the same dark figure. "Okay, let's get out of here," Malik muttered, his voice shaky. But as they turned toward the stairs, they heard footsteps coming from above. Panic set in. They didn't want to get caught. They quickly turned off their phones and hid in the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, descending into the basement. In the dim light, they could just make out a tall figure, dressed in an old-fashioned black suit and wearing a blank, pale mask. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, seeming to search the room. Sasha covered her mouth, trying to stifle her breathing, as the figure moved closer, stopping just inches away from them. The figure tilted its head as if listening, then whispered in a deep, gravelly voice, "They never leave. Not once they've seen." Suddenly, the room filled with a loud hum, almost like a low chant echoing from the walls. The photographs on the walls began to shift, each face turning toward them with expressions of horror and fear. The figure stepped back, melting into the shadows, and the hum grew louder, morphing into words they could barely understand. "They never leave. You never leave. Once you've seen." Panicking, they stumbled toward the stairs, barely able to see, tripping over their feet as they scrambled upward. As they reached the top, Sasha dared a glance back, and what she saw made her blood turn cold. The dark figure was standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching them, its blank eyes glowing faintly. And behind it, the photographs had changed, the faces now screaming, distorted in terror. They burst through the basement door, slamming it behind them. They rushed back into the party, faces pale and eyes wide, breathing heavily. When they tried to tell the other guests what they'd seen, people just laughed, thinking it was part of the Halloween prank. Even Diddy, when they found him, simply smirked and said, "I told you not to go down there." The rest of the night was a blur, but one thing was clear. They couldn't shake the image of that dark figure, nor the voices they had heard. Weeks later, each of them began experiencing strange nightmares, dreams of the basement, of being trapped, of a shadowy figure watching from the corner of the room. Months passed, and the nightmares didn't stop. And then one by one, they started noticing strange things in their homes. Photographs on their walls shifting slightly, reflections that seemed a little too still, shadows in the corners of rooms. As Halloween approached the next year, each of them received an invitation in the mail. There was no return address, just a single line that sent chills down their spines. "You can never leave, once you've seen." Each Halloween, Diddy's mansion threw open its doors to the glitz and glam of Hollywood's elite. Known for throwing the most exclusive and extravagant Halloween party, he also had a dark tradition that only a few knew about. A seance held at exactly 3 a.m., hidden away in the most secretive room of his estate. Many assumed it was just a myth, a spooky story to add mystique to the night. But those who had experienced it told a different story, though they didn't like to talk about it. This year, Diddy's invite list was even more mysterious. Rumor spread that he'd invited more people than the mansion could hold, which confused some of the regulars. But as people trickled in, a sense of dread lingered in the air, almost like the mansion itself was aware that something wasn't quite right. Some claimed they felt a cold shiver upon entering the house. Others thought they saw shadows moving from room to room, and whispers echoed faintly along the hallways. By 2:30 a.m., the crowd had thinned slightly, leaving only the most curious guests lingering. Sasha, an influencer known for her paranormal curiosity, James, a rising actor, and Lena, a journalist who was always looking for her next story, had heard rumors about the seance and wanted to witness it firsthand. They'd heard the whispers and seen the shadows, but Sasha urged them to stay, insisting it was all part of the fun. Finally, a discreet invitation was passed to the chosen guests. Sasha, James, and Lena followed a small group led by a man in an old-fashioned tuxedo up to a room on the 3rd floor. They were told to remain silent and respectful, a rule that seemed almost silly until they entered the seance room. The room was small, lined with dark velvet drapes, and in the center was a round table with 6 chairs, 5 of which were occupied by solemn-faced figures. Diddy, however, was nowhere to be seen. The candles flickered eerily, casting long shadows along the walls as the guests seated themselves around the table. The medium, a woman with hollow eyes and a low, raspy voice, began to speak. She murmured words in a language none of them could understand, her tone rhythmic and hypnotic. As she continued, the air grew colder, and the guests felt an almost crushing pressure pressing down on them. Suddenly, the medium's eyes rolled back and her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "They're here," she said. "The silent guests have arrived." Sasha glanced at the others, trying to maintain her composure, but something felt deeply wrong. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and contort, reaching toward them as if the darkness itself were alive. The medium continued, her voice wavering. "They have waited too long. They want to be seen. And they want a way back." The air in the room grew colder still, so frigid that each guest could see their breath. Then, without warning, a soft humming sound filled the room. It was a strange, otherworldly tune, almost like a lullaby, but warped and twisted. Sasha realized with horror that the sound wasn't coming from the medium. It was coming from the shadows themselves. One by one, they began to see figures forming in the darkness. They were faint at first, like foggy outlines, but they soon became clearer, more distinct. They were faces of people who looked as though they'd been trapped in the walls, watching, waiting. Some had expressions of despair, others of anger, and others of pure malice. James, unable to take his eyes off them, whispered, Are they real?" The medium turned to him, her eyes dark and vacant. "These are the silent guests. They are bound to this house, until someone takes their place." Sasha felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, takes their place?" The medium's gaze fell upon her, and she spoke as if in a trance. "They were drawn here once, like you, curious souls who went too far, who saw too much, and now they want out." Just then, one of the shadows moved closer to Sasha, its face twisted in an expression of desperation. It reached out, and though it was only a shadow, she could feel its touch, cold, damp, and heavy, as though it were trying to pull her into the darkness. She jerked away, but as she did, she realized that the shadow was following her, reaching out in silent plea. "Stop this!" James cried, jumping to his feet. But the medium grabbed his arm, her face suddenly panicked. "You can't leave, not now. They've chosen you. If you try to leave, they'll follow." The humming grew louder, filling their ears until it was almost unbearable. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, trying to drown out the noise. But it was relentless. Suddenly, She felt something icy cold on her neck, and when she opened her eyes, she saw one of the silent guests standing right in front of her, its empty eyes locked on hers. The candles began to flicker wildly, casting erratic shadows across the room. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the humming stopped. The silent guests remained, hovering near each person, eyes hungry, searching. In a moment of desperate courage, Sasha whispered, "What do you want from us?" A whisper echoed back, seemingly from everywhere at once. "Stay with us, forever." In sheer terror, they broke free from their paralysis and dashed toward the door. But as they reached it, the door wouldn't budge. The silent guests were everywhere now, their faces filling the walls, their cold hands reaching out, trapping them. Finally, the door swung open, and they stumbled out, breathless and disoriented. The hallway was empty, and the rest of the party seemed to have gone on as though nothing had happened. When they turned back, the door to the seance room was gone. Just a blank wall remained where they had been moments before. They rushed downstairs, hoping to tell Diddy what had happened. But when they found him, he just smiled and said, "I warned you not to go upstairs." The silent guests haunted each of them in the weeks that followed, appearing in reflections, shadows, even in their dreams, whispering in that strange, warped lullaby. They realized they had been marked, cursed for their curiosity, bound to be haunted, until they too would take their place as the silent guests in Diddy's mansion.